just do it. Don't be afraid of applying. Even if you've never planned a conference before and you think, well, I have no idea what I'm doing, you probably know more than you think you do. You probably have more connections than you think you do. And it is such a worthwhile experience, and you learn so much about yourself and about the other people on the team, and the information that you're presenting just is huge for a lot of people. So if you're even thinking about it, just fill out the application.
You're listening to the Oncology Nursing Podcast, where ONS Voices talk cancer, a resource from the Oncology Nursing Society. Through conversations with subject matter experts, we examine the important issues in oncology nursing, from new treatments to patient-centered research to advancements in clinical practice. Join us as we hear from nurses in all facets of oncology care, from bench to bedside and everywhere in between. Welcome to the Oncology Nursing Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Oncology Nursing Podcast. I'm your host, Lenise Taylor, Oncology Conferences Clinical Specialist at ONS. Today, we're talking with Colleen Erb, Hematology and Oncology Nurse Practitioner at Jefferson Health Asplundh Cancer Pavilion in Willow Grove, Pennsylvania, about what it's like to serve on the Volunteer Planning Committee for ONS Conference. Thanks for joining us today, Colleen.
Thanks so much for having me.
What roles have you served in to plan ONS conferences, and how long did you serve in those roles?
I was on the ONS Bridge Planning Committee in 2022, and then the next year I served as the committee planning chair. Both of those were one-year terms. The bridge planning is sort of an up to 2-year term, so you can do it for the first year and decide to come back. It's kind of nice to get your feet wet and then decide if you really like it, you can do another year.
Exactly. How did you come to serve as a member of the Bridge Planning Committee?
I saw a link on the website looking for volunteer opportunities and applied, not thinking that I'd actually get chosen because I had never done anything like this before. I had spoken at conferences, but I had never been part of a planning committee. The application wasn't too horrible. There were some open-ended questions about what your expertise is and where your interests lie, and if you've ever been on a planning committee or done anything like this or done education. It was not a horrible application process, I have to say. And then I got a phone call from the planning chair for that year, and we talked a little bit more in depth about the questions that were on the application and my interests and how I thought I would fit on the team. And then I found out a few weeks later that I was part of the planning team. So it was pretty exciting and not a horrible process at all.
That's very good to hear. What were some of the qualifications that were necessary to even apply for the position?
At the time, I think the only qualification was really that you'd had 5 years of nursing experience and you did not work in like an industry role. So you were in a clinical role. And I think those are still the same qualifications now. There were no qualifications of like having served on a planning committee or planned conferences before or being a professional development expert or anything like that. So it's pretty open-ended.
And pretty straightforward. That's always helpful when you're looking for stepping your toe into something or a volunteer opportunity.
Absolutely.
Later, you're asked to serve as the chair of the planning committee. Can you share how this occurred and what they talked to you about?
Mostly it was sort of an open-ended, if anyone on the committee had interest in being chair. And then I talked to the current planning chair and sort of got more information about what it entailed and what the responsibilities were and how it was different from being part of the general planning committee, and decided from there that I thought it was something I was interested in and let everybody know, and then found out that I was going to be chair the next year.
I think that a lot of times people want to know, they think that they want to be on the planning committee, but they don't know what goes into it, how much time it's going to take and that sort of thing. Can you share a little bit about what you did and the time commitment went into it?
The main part was topic selection and then speaker selection once we narrowed down the topics. I feel like there was a lot of brainstorming and group effort to both of those things. You don't have to individually have an exact topic or an exact speaker. There's a lot of, I think this general broad topic would be good. And then we narrowed it down as a group to something that would fit into a 45-minute presentation, because some topics just are so large that that's never going to happen. And then I think a lot of time went into sort of helping edit slides and make sure that the content was what we were looking for and make sure that it was going to fit in the time frame. Initially, there's a time commitment of about 8 to 10 hours in one weekend. And that was a lot of the brainstorming for topic selection and then where these topics fit and what categories they fit in and how they might work together. And then there was time to talk about speakers and reach out to speakers. Generally, I spent probably an hour or two a week after that first weekend working on speaker selection or talking to the speakers and checking in with them. There's a once a month meeting. And then sometimes a little more time as the conference gets closer and you have to finalize things and then slide edits and things like that. And there was another weekend of about 4 to 5 hours a day on both weekend days. But overall, the general time commitment was not horrible.
And something that you could fit in with your work and your personal life?
Absolutely. I mean, I work full time, 40 plus hours a week, and I had no trouble fitting it into work and personal life with a small child at the time who was 3, and it all worked out.
So you talked about how the planning team kind of brainstormed and came up with their topics. How did you work with the other volunteers and with the ONS staff?
A lot of Zoom meetings and emails. We texted each other, phone calls, lots of check-ins of like, hey, how are you doing? I think especially as the chair, I kind of sent quick emails to people every week or every other week and just said, anybody having any issues, anybody need to talk about anything. The ONS team is wonderful and they were always willing to help where there were questions or issues or I can't get in touch with this person. Can someone help me? It was a lot of varied communication, but all pretty easy to do.
Going back to topics again, I think, we want to design a conference and build a conference that's going to be relevant to the people who are attending. How do you stay up to date on what the current trends are in order to make sure that we're bringing those topics that are most relevant?
I think the current conversations, the ONS sort of emails and the message board, the conversation boards are really helpful because there's sort of the people answer the questions right away and you see what's really up and coming and sort of people are interested in journals. And then I did a lot of reaching out to people that I worked with, either people that I was currently working with or nurses that I had worked with over the past few years to see what their current burning questions were to find some topics that people would really be interested in.
Going a little bit deeper into that, can you share a little bit about the process of how the initial topics were decided upon, not just as the group deciding, what direction to take them from, but how you even came up with the list of ones in the beginning, and then how you chose speakers for each of those sessions?
I think the brainstorming session at the very beginning of the planning sort of season, we'd kind of throw out broad topics and then find something that was relevant in those topics based on conversations we've had or conversations that have been posted to the message boards, and then kind of narrowed it down to the things that we thought were most pertinent for that year. We talked about one that I can think of was we talked about interventional radiology and how it seemed like it was taking on much more of a bigger role in oncology and how that could fit into the conference and whether we wanted to have a specific topic or an overview of the things that interventional radiology can offer for oncology patients. And we ended up doing kind of like a 101 topic on that one because it was a newer topic that people were kind of interested in just hearing like, hey, what do you guys do for cancer patients? But some topics, it was like, okay, we want to know about biosimilars related to this information or from a pharmacy perspective, or how do we get things paid for? So we sort of took broad topics and narrowed them down among the planning group to get a topic that was feasible in 45 minutes, but also really current. And I think speakers, I went with who's presented on this recently at another conference or who has written an article on this topic, or, hey, does anybody know someone at your institution that's really passionate about this topic? And can we get them to speak for us? Or just reaching out to people that I knew already. that I knew had some expertise. And if they couldn't do it, sort of saying, hey, is there anybody else that you can think of that might be able to?
Building a network.
Yes. Building a network
is so important to what we do, and looking beyond, the just who we work with or just in the area that we are, but, who can we reach out to across the country or in a rural area or something like that.
And I think we did try to kind of spread out the speakers. Don't have all speakers from the Northeast because, we all know that there's a huge concentration of people in this area, but it's not the same view as someone who lives in the middle of the country who doesn't have the same access. And how can we kind of get that viewpoint as well?
In planning a conference, what kind of effect do you think you've had on oncology nurses, both individually and collectively?
I have to say, this was possibly the hardest question. I was like, I don't know. I mean, I hope I had a positive one. I think the fact that we picked topics that we thought were really up to date and really things that were sort of up and coming or current worries, concerns, new drugs or new ways of doing things was really pertinent to nurses who are treating patients every day. I'd like to hope that it was really good information that actually you can bring back to the bedside once you leave the conference and not just this theoretical knowledge of, well, that sounds great, but how do I actually do it?
Exactly. What's the key takeaway? What can I take home with me and implement right then?
Absolutely.
From a personal perspective, what effect did serving on the planning committee have on you?
I met a lot of great nurses and great people. It also made me a little bit more interested in learning more about the professional development part of nursing and educating nurses and making sure that I stayed up to date on some of those topics. I learned a lot about the backstage, in quotes, process of conferences. I had spoken before, but seeing the other side of it was a whole different picture and all the work that goes into it. And really learned a lot about picking the topics and how do we find the best information and the best sort of new things to present every time. Doing it for 2 years, it was kind of interesting to see, well, we presented this last year. Do we want to build on that this year? Or do we need something totally different? And met some great speakers that I still talk to now, which is also kind of fun. Bigger network is always good.
Exactly. For listeners who would like to apply for an opportunity like this, what qualities and skills do you think would be important to be successful in this role?
I think the biggest is to being open to learn about new topics and reaching out to potential speakers. I think that was my biggest worry initially was I'm just randomly sending an email to this person asking if they want to speak. Okay. But really people are very happy to sort of get that email and they're really interested. And, if they're not, they're happy to help you find someone else about the same topic, which is nice. I got an email back saying, I can't do it, but here, why don't you contact this person instead, which was really nice. And I think having some knowledge of like how to work PowerPoint and how to be able to adjust slides or help your speakers along in finding certain information or moving things around, making it look better for the audience is somewhat helpful. But it's more about being open to learn. I learned more from the planning team and the ONS team than I thought I ever would, which was wonderful.
It's always good to hear.
Yeah.
Is there any advice you'd give to a nurse who's thinking about applying to be on a conference planning committee?
Just do it. Don't be afraid of applying. Even if you've never planned a conference before and you think, well, I have no idea what I'm doing. You probably know more than you think you do. You probably have more connections than you think you do. And it is such a worthwhile experience. And you learn so much about yourself and about the other people on the team. And the information that you're presenting just is huge for a lot of people. So if you're even thinking about it, just fill out the application.
I think what I got most out of it was the lifelong friendships that I formed with people on the planning teams that I worked on and still text with them on a daily basis. Just sent something to someone last night. So I think that's the biggest piece to me that's important.
Absolutely. And I feel like I know people sort of around the country now that I would never have met before because our paths probably wouldn't have crossed, but I still talk to them all the time.
I have just a couple more questions for you. When participating in conference planning, how can healthcare professionals evaluate their own hidden or implicit biases during their time of service?
For me, topic selection and slide review really made me sort of evaluate and look at, I think, more the implicit bias than anything else, because when you have to make sure that everything is as inclusive as possible, you realize like, oh, I didn't even think about picking this visual instead of something else, or, like making sure that there are things that are presented a certain way definitely makes you think about that.
What are some common misconceptions about conference planning?
That you have to be an educator or a long-time nurse or a professional development nurse to plan a conference, and you absolutely don't.
Exactly.
I mean, it helps to have them on the team, obviously, but not everyone on the team has to be that person.
Exactly. Just one's good.
Yeah.
What's something about this topic that's not discussed, but you wish people knew more about?
You mentioned it before, the friendships you make and really how much fun you have with the people that you're planning the conference with. I mean, it's not all like rote work that you're just sitting there reading things off of paper. Like you really do have fun with these people and build relationships and friendships.
What experience might be helpful if oncology nurses want to get involved in conference planning?
I think the best experience is really keeping up to date on sort of current topics and the ones that are sort of new and exciting and people want to hear about. I think just being open to learn more is huge in conference planning. Like you're going to learn something every time you have a meeting, to be honest. So being open to learning is huge.
Exactly. And that's going to open up the door for others to learn from you.
Definitely.
Colleen, this has been so much fun talking with you. Do you have any final comments for us?
I really want to stress to people, just apply. Like I never thought I'd actually be picked, but sent the application in anyway. And it was a huge plus for me. It was a great experience. So even if you don't think you have the expertise to do it, just apply. It's worth it.
I want to thank you so much for talking with me and also for your time as planning team member and planning team chair. You pulled off an amazing conference, and I know everybody who went to it enjoyed it. And I wish I could throw all of the comments from the evaluation into this so that people could see what people get out of it.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Oncology Nursing Podcast. Tell us about your favorite part in this episode by leaving a review wherever you download your podcast. For more resources and information about oncology nursing, visit us at ons.org or voice.ons.org. The ideas and opinions shared in this episode represent those of the guest and not necessarily ONS.